Ever wonder what human flesh tastes like? Of course not, because you're not a deranged psychopath. The same cannot be said about Geoffrey Njoroge Matheri, a Kenyan murderer who ate his victim's flesh and drank their blood. Geoffrey, which ironically means God's peace, is now known as the Kenyan vampire.
The next one is one of the many bizarre stories that we bring you every day at the news desk. The self-confessed vampire Geoffrey Matheri, alias Fongo, has been charged with the murder of Miriam Wairimo, who died on August the 29th of 2008 at Kihoto area in Naivasha. Geoffrey was arrested 5 years ago after he confessed to cannibalism.
Hi friends, welcome to the Ayira Faith channel. I am Ayira and I post true crime videos every week. So if that's your kind of vibe, please consider subscribing. Today's story is from my beautiful home country of Kenya and happens in Naivasha town, Nakuru County. It's late morning on 14th August 2008 and the residents of Kihoto Estate are confronted with a horrible sight. A young girl, naked, bloody and swollen beyond recognition, stumbles towards a small group of people before falling to the ground. Gathering around her, they noticed that she had rotting wounds all over her body and she smelled terrible. But she kept pointing to a small house that she had appeared to just have come from. So while a few people helped her up, the rest walked to the house to investigate. Apart from some weird items in the house was empty. So they moved to a small house next to the first house and checked it too. As they did so, they heard a man's voice and they followed the sound. As soon as they turned the corner, they saw a man holding a huge knife and standing over a pale woman lying on the ground next to a freshly dug grave. As they shouted and ran towards them, the man took off running. The two women would later be identified as 16-year-old Esther Akinyi and 21-year-old Naomi Wanjiru. They told the police that they had been kidnapped, raped for days, and had their blood drunk and flesh eaten in a ritualistic-like manner. Naomi would say that on the 19th of August 2008, at around 7:30 p.m. while she went to the shops, a group of street boys attacked her, covering her nose and mouth with a strange-smelling piece of cloth, rendering her unconscious. The mother of two would later wake up in an unknown location with a tall man standing over her. Her legs and hands were tied. He would ask her name and she would tell him. The man, who would later be identified as Matheri, would then pull her up on her feet, cut the ropes from her feet, and push her forward, saying, "Walk." Being terrified, Naomi tried to escape, but he caught up with her and stabbed her in her thigh. He warned her that he would kill her if she tried to run again. He then led her to a secluded plot with 4 small mud houses and opened one of them. He pushed her inside, and as soon as she entered the house, she heard whimpering and realized that she was not alone. Naomi said that she would both be relieved that she wasn't alone, but also terrified that her attacker had done this before. He locked the door behind him, walked over to the bed, pushed the other young woman to the wall, and ordered Naomi to climb onto the bed. She did. He then slept between the two women, and Naomi slept in front of Matheri with her hands and feet tied and in a fetal position. His arm was around her. Naomi did not sleep for the entire night, and in the morning, as her kidnapper woke up, she felt a sudden sharp pain on the right side of her face and blacked out. When she regained consciousness a few hours later, she realized that he had punched her unconscious. She was now under his bed, lying on her back, and her hands and feet were also tied. So she used the back of her arms and the back of her legs to crawl and push herself out from under the bed. She then saw Esther on the bed, who told her that she had been captive for 4 days now, and as the two girls spoke, the man came back into the house and walked to a corner of the room. He brought back a yellow metal cup and 3 empty soda bottles. He then took out a knife and stabbed Naomi. He pressed the blood into the cup, and when it was almost full, climbed onto the bed and beat Esther as she screamed. Naomi would say that he would eat Esther's flesh and drink her blood like one who was eating tea and bread. This was Esther's back after the rescue, and the amount of injuries on her back would demonstrate the kind of cruelty that she went through when she was captive. Matheri would later be interviewed, and when he was asked how he could eat human flesh, this was his answer.
Ni kama ya mayai, yenye tu unaweza kula mayai. Kuna kachumvi kidogo.
Alikuwa anamuuma kabisa, unaona ametoa nyama. Anakuja ananidunga na kisu, so akinidunga damu inaruka. Then anaweka kwa kikombe.
Kuna kachumvi kidogo.
After eating and drinking to his fill, he drained blood from Naomi using a syringe and filled the 3 empty soda bottles. He then left in the night, carrying the bottles, the blood, and returned a few hours later without the bottles of blood. He would then rape both Esther and Naomi before tying their legs back together and going to sleep. The 2 women would testify that this was the routine each and every day, and when they got too weak, he would feed them live rats. On 14th of August 2008, Matheri made a grave mistake, but one that would save the ladies' lives. He left the house unlocked, and Esther managed to escape. She met a small group of people nearby who in turn rescued Naomi before Matheri could kill her. Naomi testified that when Matheri came back and found that Esther had escaped, he got very angry and decided to kill her. He pushed her to the back of the plot where he had dug a grave and told her to kneel down and pray. He said, and she quotes, "This is your resting place. Now pray for your soul to go to heaven." And when she did, she knelt down and she prayed. He then laid her down with her neck on a big piece of rock, intending to decapitate her. He instead stabbed her on the right side of her chest, and before he could do any further harm to her, she was rescued by the villagers when they came round the corner. It is said that Naomi was grey in color and at the verge of death, as Matheri had drained almost all her blood. She testified that the next thing she remembered was her waking up in hospital surrounded by doctors, policemen, and the media, and she could not believe that indeed she was still alive. Geoffrey Matheri was later arrested on 15th August 2008 in a hotel in Naivasha. He was charged with rape, assault, and unlawful confinement. A charge of murder was later included when the police visited his house and found a decomposing body of a female with certain body parts missing. The police also recovered a blood-stained mattress, school uniforms for girls, whips, and girls' underwear. Matheri soon confessed to the crime, saying that Bishop Jeremiah of the New Hope of All Nations Church in Naivasha had enlisted him to commit murder, cut the breasts of women, cut men's sexual organs, and drain their blood, and take these body parts and the blood to the bishop himself. He said he used to do this every day at between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. in the morning, and they used to meet at the bishop's church at that particular time in the night. You see, Matheri grew up in Kinangop, just a few kilometers away from Naivasha town, and when he was 10 years old, he ran away from home. He started living in the streets of Naivasha town and became a street boy. He claimed that the bishop approached a group of street boys one day and offered an opportunity to be rich. Matheri would take him up on his offer, and he would live with the bishop for a month before his first assignment. The bishop would soon be arrested, and after investigations were concluded, the bishop was set free for lack of concrete evidence against him. The bishop said or claimed that he did not know why Matheri would make such outrageous statements against him, since he knew Matheri from his charity work that he used to do around Naivasha town, and he helped street boys. So he knew Matheri as a street boy. Until today, he still claims that the only relationship he had with Matheri was that of pastor and street boy, and he was only doing God's work by assisting the street boys in Naivasha town to get food, shelter, clothing, and some form of education. Matheri was arraigned in court 3 weeks after his arrest and charged with assault, rape, and unlawful confinement. He would, however, get acquitted of the serious crime of rape and assault due to shoddy investigations. The P3 form, which is a document presented in court as evidence in cases of rape and assault, was not produced. Expressing her disappointment in the investigators and prosecution, the magistrate ruled that the prosecution had only proved the charge of unlawful confinement against Matheri, but failed to prove the charge of rape and assault. You see, it is not enough for a victim to claim rape. Their claims need to be supported by evidence which includes doctors' reports, DNA evidence, etc. All this would normally be included in the P3 form, which was left out by the investigators and the prosecution. Therefore, Matheri would be sentenced to only 4 years imprisonment for the unlawful confinement charge. For the murder charge, however, the police purported to identify the decomposing body retrieved as that of one Miriam Wairimu. Matheri was charged with murder in criminal case number 90 of 2008, which act is contrary to section 203 as read with section 204 of the Penal Code Cap 63 laws of Kenya. The offense of murder is defined under section 203 of the Penal Code as follows: any person who of malice aforethought causes death of another person by unlawful act or omission is guilty of murder. To prove the offense of murder, the prosecution had to prove 3 factors beyond reasonable doubt. Number 1, the proof of the fact and cause of death of the deceased. 2, proof that the deceased met his or her death due to an unlawful act or omission on the part of the accused. And 3, proof that the said unlawful act was committed with malice aforethought. The prosecution, through a post-mortem report, proved that the cause of death was extensive hemorrhage due to multiple cut and stab wounds. The prosecution, however, did not prove that the deceased was indeed Miriam Wairimu. You see, in murder cases, unless the death of a person is proved beyond reasonable doubt, it may be likely that the accused may be charged with the murder of a person that is still alive. In this case, the prosecution could not categorically prove that Miriam Wairimu was dead. There were no family members to identify the body, no police report of her disappearance or any missing persons report. There was not even a death certificate or a burial permit. A man by the names of Joseph Nganga Kimani had given blood for a paternity DNA test to be conducted on the remains, but the DNA results had come out inconclusive. The prosecution did not call Joseph or any of his family members to court as witnesses to identify the body of the deceased and actually identify her as Miriam Wairimu, his daughter. This was just the beginning of a trail of mistakes made by the prosecution and the investigators that saw Matheri go scot-free. On the other 2 points, the prosecution relied on 3 main factors to impute guilt on Matheri. Number 1, a confession that he gave on tape. Number 2, recovery of the body buried inside a house said to be Matheri's. And number 3, the confession of the accused on the conviction of the accused in the abduction and unlawful confinement of Esther and Naomi. On the confession that Matheri gave on tape, Article 52 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 states as follows: every accused person has a right to a fair trial, which includes the right to refuse to give self-incriminating evidence. And Section 25A1 of the Evidence Act provides the circumstances under which a confession may be admitted as evidence, and it states as follows: a confession or any admission of a fact tending to the proof of guilt made by an accused person is not admissible and shall not be proved as against such person unless it is made in court before a judge, a magistrate, or before a police officer other than the investigating officer, being an officer not below the rank of an inspector of police, a third party of the person's choice. The court found that Matheri's confession was not taken in the proper manner. He was not informed of his right to refuse to give self-incriminating evidence, and neither was it recorded in the presence of his defense counsel or any third party of his choosing. The recorded confession was therefore struck out. The prosecution, however, called the investigating officer to the stand, who testified that he had a written confession from Matheri that was taken in accordance with Section 25A1 of the Evidence Act. Matheri's advocate disputed this, and so a trial within a trial commenced to determine the admissibility or otherwise of the written confession. The investigation officer did not return to the dock after he was stepped down, and the prosecution closed its case without ever calling him back. I mean, why would you do that? Why was the prosecution so shoddy with their work? So anyway, let's move on to the third matter, which was the recovery of the body buried inside a house that was allegedly belonging to Matheri. On the body recovered in Matheri's alleged house, the prosecution could not prove that that was indeed his house. There were 4 different houses in that same plot, and Matheri only lived in one of them. In his confession, the written one and the taped one, Matheri had confessed that the house where the body was found belonged to him. But since both confessions, written or taped, had been thrown out by the court, then it means there was no way for the prosecution to prove that that house actually belonged to Matheri. So this was also struck out. On the third matter of conviction for unlawful confinement of Esther and Naomi, the court stated that just because Matheri had been convicted for unlawful confinement of Esther and Naomi, it did not mean that he actually murdered Miriam. Naomi also testified that she did not see Matheri with Miriam before or after her death. She did not find any body in Matheri's house, at least where she was confined. The only other person that was with her in that house was Esther, who, by the way, refused to testify in this case, and all she did was leave Naivasha after she left the hospital. So there were no witnesses who had seen Matheri with Miriam when she was alive, or even when she was dead with her body, or even him burying her body or trying to conceal any kind of evidence. So this claim was also struck out, and Matheri was released from prison on 29th July 2016 after serving 4 years for unlawful confinement and another 4 in remand during the pendency of his cases. He served 8 years in total. After his release, he did not return to Naivasha town. Instead, he went back to Kenyan to live with his uncle, where he was beaten up by angry villagers and hospitalized for weeks. In his statement, Matheri mentioned that he had killed more men than women. So it means Matheri had been doing this for a while now. There was just no evidence to prove that he had actually killed these men. It's even more disheartening to learn that his victims continue to suffer the consequences of his actions to death. Naomi says her life has never been the same again.
Nilitoka huko, everything ikaisha, my life, my friends, my husband, my family. I lost everything. Because like for my husband, I understand him. There's no way he could stay with me. So no one wanted even to stay with my kids, not even my family. So they neglected me and my kids too. And my kids were innocent. And that's hiyo ndio huwa inanipain sana. Because watoto wangu walikuwa wakubwa and they knew this story. And so wakati mtu anakuuliza, "Mom, kulienda aje?" You know, you feel so bad. Okay, after kukaa kwa safe house, now hakuna mtu it's like sasa walinitupa huko kwa safe house. No one came to visit me. As in to know what happened.
Thank you, friends, for joining me today for this story about the Kenyan vampire and cannibalist Geoffrey Njoroge Matheri. Please give your comments on him. Do you think he will strike again? And also please give your comments on the way the prosecution and investigation handled this case. Please consider subscribing to this channel, comment and like and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time for the next one. Goodbye.